The sun was setting over the vast expanse of desert, painting the horizon with streaks of orange and crimson. The air carried a stillness that only the Wild West could offer, where silence stretched endlessly across miles of barren land. In this desolate corner of the world, there stood a lone cabin, weathered by time and untouched by civilization. It was here that a man named Silas lived, a recluse who had chosen solitude as his companion for 2 decades. Silas was not a man of many words. His face bore the scars of battles fought long ago, both physical and emotional. His hands were rough from years of laboring under the scorching sun, tending to a small plot of land and maintaining the dilapidated ranch that surrounded him. To those few who had ventured close enough to glimpse him through their binoculars or spy on him from afar, he was an enigma, a ghost of the past who refused to be part of the present. For 20 years, Silas had lived alone. He spoke to no one, trusted no one, and let nothing disturb the quiet rhythm of his days. Until one fateful night. It began like any other evening in the desert. The stars emerged one by little, twinkling faintly against the velvet sky. The moon cast its pale glow over the landscape, illuminating the rugged terrain with a silver hue. Silas sat on the porch of his cabin, carving a piece of wood into something indistinguishable. The rhythmic sound of his knife, slicing through the grain, filled the otherwise silent night. But then, a noise broke the tranquility. A soft whimpering, barely audible but persistent enough to catch his attention. At first, Silas ignored it, chalking it up to some stray animal caught in the brush. But as the sound grew louder, more distinct, he realized it wasn't coming from an animal at all. It was the sound of crying. Crying. Silas froze, his knife suspended midair. For a moment, he debated whether to investigate. Curiosity warred with caution within him. Little did he know this decision would change everything. Slowly, he rose from his chair and stepped off the porch, following the source of sound. The tears seemed to echo in the stillness of the night, leading him toward the far end of his property. As he approached, his heart quickened, not out of fear, but out of confusion. What could possibly be causing such sorrow in a place so remote? And then he saw her, beneath the dim light of the moon, a figure huddled near the base of his porch. She was wrapped in a tattered shawl, her body shaking with sobs. Her face was obscured by her hands. But even in the shadows, Silas could see the anguish etched into her posture. He hesitated, unsure of what to do. This woman, this stranger, was an intrusion into his carefully constructed life of isolation. Yet, something about her vulnerability stirred a forgotten emotion deep within him, a flicker of compassion that he hadn't felt in years. "Who are you?" Silas finally asked, his voice gruff from disuse. The woman looked up, startled. Her eyes were red-rimmed, brimming with unshed tears. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I need help." "Help?" Silas frowned. He wasn't used to offering assistance. He had spent too long fending for himself. But the desperation in her tone made him pause. There was something about her presence that demanded attention, a plea that resonated with a part of him he thought was long buried. "What's wrong?" he pressed, his tone softer now, though still guarded. The woman hesitated, glancing around as if afraid someone might overhear her. Then, slowly, she reached into her shawl and pulled out a small bundle. Wrapped tightly in cloth, it revealed itself to be a baby, a tiny, fragile infant whose cries joined her own in filling the night. I can't take care of him any more," she confessed, her voice cracking. "I've been running, hiding, but I don't know where else to go." Silas stared at her, disbelief washing over him. A child? Here, in the middle of nowhere? Something about her story didn't sit right with him, but before he could question further, she thrust the bundle into his arms. "Please," she begged again, her voice breaking. "Take him. Keep him safe." Before Silas could respond, she turned and fled into the darkness, disappearing into night as quickly as she had appeared. Left standing alone on his porch, Silas clutched the baby tightly, his mind racing with questions. Who was she? Why had she come to him? And most importantly, why had she left her child in his care? Days turned into weeks, and Silas found himself adapting to an unexpected new reality. The baby, whom he eventually named Thomas after his late brother, became the center of his world. Caring for a child forced Silas to confront parts of himself he had long abandoned: the ability to love, to nurture, to protect. At first, it was difficult. Silas knew nothing about raising children, and every feeding, diaper change, and nap time was a challenge. But gradually, he learned, driven by a sense of responsibility he couldn't explain. Thomas brought life back to the cabin, his laughter and coos filling the once empty space with warmth and joy. Yet, despite the happiness Thomas brought, Silas couldn't shake the lingering questions about the woman who had left him. Who was she? Where had she gone? And why had she entrusted her child to him, of all people? One day, while tending to his fields, Silas noticed a rider approaching from the distance. Squinting against the glare of the sun, he recognized the silhouette immediately. It was the woman from the porch. Her arrival sent a jolt of surprise through him, followed swiftly by apprehension. As she drew closer, Silas could see the exhaustion etched onto her face. She dismounted her horse and approached him cautiously, her eyes darting between him and Thomas, who was playing nearby. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her voice tinged with regret. "I shouldn't have left him with you." Silas crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "You think now's a good time to apologize?" She flinched at his harsh tone, but continued speaking. "I didn't have a choice. They were after me. After us. If they found me with him, they would have killed us both." "Who?" Silas demanded, his patience wearing thin. The woman hesitated, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Men from the town where I worked. They accused me of stealing money from the bank. I didn't do it, but they wouldn't listen. When they discovered I was pregnant, they threatened to take my child away." Silas studied her closely, searching for signs of deceit. But her words rang true, matching the desperation he had seen in her eyes that first night. "And now," he asked, "what happens now?" The woman sighed heavily. "I came back because I heard they're moving on. They've given up the search. I just wanted to make sure Thomas is okay." Silas glanced at the boy, who was giggling as he chased a butterfly. Against his better judgment, he felt a pang of sympathy for the woman. She may have made mistakes, but her love for her son was undeniable. "You can stay," he offered reluctantly. "For a while, at least." Her eyes widened in surprise, then softened with gratitude. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. Months passed, and the trio settled into a routine. The woman introduced herself as Clara, and though she and Silas rarely spoke of the past, there was an unspoken understanding between them. Together, they rebuilt the ranch, planting crops and raising livestock. Thomas flourished under their care, growing into a curious and adventurous boy. But peace never lasts forever in the Wild West. One stormy night, as lightning illuminated the dark sky, a group of riders appeared on the horizon. Their silhouettes loomed large against the backdrop of thunderclouds, sending chills down Silas's spine. He recognized them instantly, the men Clara had warned him about. Clara tensed beside him, clutching Thomas protectively. "What should we do?" she whispered, panic rising in her voice. Silas tightened his grip on his rifle, his mind racing. "We fight," he replied firmly. "We protect what's ours." The confrontation was inevitable. As the riders closed in, Silas stood ready, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. Clara crouched behind him, shielding Thomas with her body. The tension in the air was palpable, each second stretching longer than the last. Then, just as the first shot rang out, an unexpected twist unfolded. One of the riders called out, halting the others. "Wait!" he shouted, his voice carrying across the rain-soaked plains. To everyone's astonishment, the leader removed his mask, revealing a familiar face, one Silas hadn't seen in years. It was his old partner, Daniel, a man he had believed dead. "Silas," Daniel said, his voice heavy with emotion. "It's me." Stunned, Silas lowered his weapon, disbelief clouding his thoughts. "Daniel? How?" Daniel dismounted his horse and stepped forward, his gaze locking onto Clara and Thomas. "I've been looking for you," he said, addressing Clara directly. "I knew you were innocent. I've been trying to clear your name." Clara stared at him, her mouth agape. "You believe me?" Daniel nodded solemnly. I always did. These men, they were misled. They'll leave you alone now. Relief washed over Clara, her shoulders sagging with exhaustion. Thank you, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. As the storm subsided and the riders departed, leaving the trio alone once more, Silas reflected on the events that had transpired. Life in the Wild West was unpredictable, full of twists and turns that tested the strength and resilience of those who dared to survive it. But amidst the chaos, Silas had found something he never expected: family. And though the future remained uncertain, he knew one thing for certain. He would face whatever came next with Clara and Thomas by his side. The days that followed were filled with a mix of emotions, relief, gratitude, and an underlying sense of unease. Though Daniel had intervened and the threat had subsided, Silas couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles weren't entirely over. The Wild West was a place where danger lurked around every corner, and trust was as scarce as water in the desert. Daniel stayed for a few days, explaining how he had managed to track down Clara's accusers and expose the truth. It turned out that one of the bank clerks, jealous of Clara's position and reputation, had framed her for the theft. With Daniel's help, evidence had been uncovered proving her innocence. Still, Silas remained cautious, knowing full well that justice in these parts often came too late, or not at all. During those days, Silas found himself observing Daniel closely. There was something different about him now, a weariness in his eyes, a weight on his shoulders that hadn't been there before. They spoke little of the past, but when they did, it was clear that both men carried scars from their time together as partners. Silas learned that Daniel had spent years drifting, working odd jobs and staying off the radar after narrowly escaping death during a robbery gone wrong. Clara, meanwhile, adjusted to this new reality with surprising grace. She helped tend to the fields and cared for Thomas with unwavering devotion. Her bond with Silas deepened, though neither of them put words to the growing connection between them. There was comfort in their shared struggle, a silent understanding that they were no longer alone. But unbeknownst to them, a hidden danger still lingered in the shadows. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the ranch, Silas noticed something unusual. A faint trail of hoofprints led away from the property, heading toward the dense forest that bordered their land. Curiosity, and perhaps instinct, prompted him to investigate further. Grabbing his lantern and rifle, he set off into the night, leaving Clara and Thomas safe inside the cabin. The forest was eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves or chirp of crickets. The moonlight filtered weakly through the canopy, creating patches of light and darkness that danced along the ground. Silas followed the tracks carefully, his senses heightened. He knew better than to underestimate the dangers of venturing into unknown territory. As he ventured deeper, the air grew colder and the scent of pine mingled with the earthy smell of damp soil. Then he saw it, a flicker of movement ahead. Someone or something was watching him. "Who's there?" Silas called out, his voice steady despite the tension coiling in his gut. No answer came, but the movement ceased, as if whatever had been observing him had vanished into thin air. Silas scanned the area, his instincts telling him that this wasn't just some stray animal or wandering traveler. Something more sinister was at play. Retracing his steps, Silas returned to the cabin, his mind racing with possibilities. He didn't share his findings with Clara immediately, choosing instead to keep watch throughout the night. But even as dawn broke and the golden light of morning bathed the land, the unease refused to leave him. Weeks passed, and life seemed to return to normal, or as normal as it could be for three people living in the heart of the Wild West. Yet, Silas couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was amiss. Small things began to add up. Missing tools from the shed, strange noises in the night, and the occasional glimpse of a shadowy figure lurking near the edge of the property. Clara noticed his restlessness and confronted him one evening while Thomas played nearby. "What's bothering you?" she asked gently, her eyes searching his face for answers. Silas hesitated, reluctant to burden her with his concerns. But seeing the worry etched into her features, he relented. "I think someone's been watching us," he admitted. "Tracks, noises. I don't know who or why, but it's making me uneasy." Claire's expression hardened, determination replacing fear. "Then we'll find out ourselves. she declared. "We won't let anyone threaten what we've built here." Together, they devised a plan. Using the cover of darkness, they would stake out the perimeter of the property, armed and ready to confront whoever dared to trespass on their land. Daniel, having stayed longer than expected, offered his assistance, bringing with him years of experience in dealing with such situations. That night, on a glow of a full moon, the trio positioned themselves strategically around the ranch. Silas took the northern side, his rifle resting against his shoulder. Clara covered the eastern edge, her pistol drawn and her gaze sharp. Daniel patrolled the southern boundary, his movements silent and deliberate. Hours passed without incident, the only sounds being the gentle rustling of the wind and the occasional hoot of an owl. Just as Silas began to doubt his suspicions, a noise shattered the silence, a twig snapping somewhere to the west. Instantly, all three sprang into action. Silas signaled silently to Clara and Daniel, pointing in the direction of sound. Moving cautiously, they converged on the source of the disturbance. As they drew closer, the outline of a figure became visible, crouched low behind a cluster of bushes. "Come out," Silas commanded, his voice cutting through the night like a knife. "Show yourself." For a moment, there was no response. Then, slowly, the figure stood, revealing itself to be none other than the man who had accused Clara of theft, the same man whose lies had torn her life apart. "You again!" Clara spat, her voice laced with venom. "What do you want?" The man sneered, unrepentant despite the barrels of 3 weapons trained on him. "I came to finish what I started," he growled. "This land belongs to me now. You're nothing but squatters." Silas's grip tightened on his rifle, anger boiling beneath the surface. "You lost that right when you lied about Clara," he snarled. "Now get off our land before I make you regret it." The man laughed, a cold, bitter sound that echoed through the night. "You think I'm alone? My friends are waiting just beyond the trees. Hand over the boy, and maybe we'll let you live." At the mention of Thomas, Clara's demeanor shifted. Her stance became rock solid, her resolve unshakable. "Over my dead body," she replied, her voice steady and resolute. The standoff stretched taut, each second dragging by like hours. Then, without warning, shots rang out from the surrounding woods. Bullets whizzed past, forcing Silas, Clara, and Daniel to take cover behind nearby rocks and trees. "We need to hold them off until help arrives," Daniel shouted, reloading his weapon with practiced ease. "Help!" Silas echoed, confusion clouding his thoughts. Daniel grinned grimly. "I sent word to some old contacts. They should be here soon." With renewed determination, the trio fought back, using every ounce of skill and strategy they possessed. The battle raged on, the echoes of gunfire reverberating through the night. Trees splintered, dirt flew, and the air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder. Finally, just as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them, the sound of approaching hooves announced the arrival of reinforcements. A group of riders emerged from the distance, their numbers overwhelming the attackers. Cornered and outnumbered, the remaining foes surrendered, their leader glaring daggers at Silas, Clara, and Daniel. As the dust settled and the last echoes of conflict faded into the night, Silas allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. Against all odds, they had survived another trial, and though the scars of the past would always remain, he felt a glimmer of hope for the future. For the first time in 20 years, Silas truly understood what it meant to have family. Not just blood relations, but bonds forged through shared struggles and sacrifices. Together, with Clara and Thomas by his side, he faced the uncertainties of tomorrow, ready to embrace whatever challenges lay ahead. The days following the confrontation were a blur of activity. With the threat neutralized and their adversaries apprehended, Silas, Clara, and Thomas found themselves adjusting to a newfound sense of security. The ranch buzzed with life as they worked tirelessly to repair the damage caused by the skirmish. Trees that had been splintered by bullets were chopped down and repurposed for firewood, while patches of scorched earth were tilled and replanted. It was hard work, but it brought a strange kind of peace, a rhythm that reminded them of the resilience they had built together. Daniel stayed longer than anyone expected, lending his expertise in fortifying property against future threats. He helped construct sturdy fences made from thick timber, reinforced the cabin's doors and windows, and even dug trenches around the perimeter to deter intruders. Though he rarely spoke of his reasons for lingering, his actions spoke volumes. To Silas, it seemed as though Daniel sought redemption, not just for abandoning him years ago, but also for failing to protect those who needed help when Clara was falsely accused. One evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Silas approached Daniel, who was sharpening his knife near the edge of the forest. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of pine needles and damp soil. For a moment, neither man spoke, the only sound being the rhythmic scrape of metal against stone. "You don't have to stay," Silas said finally, his voice steady but tinged with curiosity. Daniel paused, glancing up at Silas with an expression that was equal parts gratitude and sorrow. "I know," he replied after a beat, "but I want to. This feels right. Like maybe I can make up for some of the mistakes I've made." Silas nodded slowly, understanding without needing to ask further. There was a bond between them, one forged in the fires of hardship and survival, that transcended words. They were brothers in arms, bound not by blood, but by shared experiences and unspoken promises. As the weeks turned into months, the small family unit thrived. Clara took charge of organizing the household, her natural leadership shining through as she coordinated efforts to expand the fields and improve the livestock pens. She taught Thomas how to read using old books salvaged from a nearby abandoned homestead, her patience endless as she guided him through each letter and word. Watching her interact with her son filled Silas with a warmth he hadn't known existed, a pride so deep it sometimes caught him off guard. Thomas, now older and more curious than ever, became the heart of the ranch. His laughter echoed through the mornings as he chased chickens or played hide-and-seek among the bales of hay. He idolized both Silas and Daniel, often tagging along as they repaired tools or tended to the animals. On quiet evenings, he would sit cross-legged on the porch, listening intently as Daniel regaled him with tales of adventures from their younger days, stories of daring escapes, narrow misses, and lessons learned the hard way. Yet, beneath the surface of this newfound harmony, there lingered a question none of them dared to voice openly. What did the future hold? The Wild West was a restless land, forever shifting and evolving. Peace could be fleeting, and danger could return at any moment. Still, they chose to live in the present, cherishing each day as if it might be their last. One afternoon, as the heat of midsummer pressed down upon the land, Clara called Silas and Daniel to the kitchen table. She had spent the morning poring over maps and letters she had received from contacts in distant towns. Her eyes sparkled with excitement as she unfolded a worn piece of parchment, its edges frayed from frequent handling. "I think we should consider expanding our reach," she began, pointing to a marked location on the map. "There's a trading post about 50 miles east of here. If we establish a relationship with them, we could barter our crops and livestock for supplies we need, maybe even bring in new tools or seeds." Silas leaned forward, intrigued despite his initial skepticism. "That far out? Isn't it dangerous?" Clara smiled, her confidence unwavering. "It will be worth it. We've worked too hard to let fear hold us back. Besides, if we go together, we'll be unstoppable," Daniel finished for her, grinning. The prospect of adventure clearly appealed to him, reigniting a spark within that had dimmed over the years. After much discussion, they agreed to embark on the journey the following week. Preparations began immediately, with Silas overseeing the packing of wagons, while Clara ensured they carried enough provisions for the trip. Thomas, thrilled at the idea of traveling beyond the familiar confines of the ranch, insisted on helping load sacks of grain and barrels of water. Even Daniel couldn't suppress his enthusiasm, testing the horses' harnesses and ensuring their weapons were in good condition. When the day finally arrived, the group set out under a clear blue sky, the promise of discovery hanging heavy in the air. The road ahead wound through rolling hills and dense forests, offering breathtaking views of golden fields stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Along the way, they encountered travelers and traders, sharing stories and exchanging news from far-off places. At night, they camped beneath a canopy of stars, the silence broken only by the crackling of their campfire and the occasional hoot of an owl. Thomas marveled at the constellations above, peppering Daniel with questions about the names and meanings behind each cluster of lights. Clara hummed softly as she mended clothing by the firelight, while Silas stood watch, his gaze scanning the darkness for signs of trouble. Despite the beauty of the journey, shadows crept into their thoughts. Memories of past dangers resurfaced, whispering warnings of unseen threats lurking just beyond sight. Yet they pressed on, driven by hope and determination. Their arrival at the trading post proved fruitful. The owner, a grizzled old man named Jeb, welcomed them warmly, impressed by the quality of their goods. Deals were struck, and soon their wagons brimmed with fresh supplies: tools, seeds, cloth, and even a crate of books for Thomas. As they prepared to leave, Jeb handed Silas a folded note, explaining that it had been left for him by a mysterious traveler. Curious, Silas opened the note later that evening, his brow furrowing as he read its contents. It contained a single sentence, written in bold, hurried handwriting. Asterisk, beware the storm that follows calm. Asterisk. Confused, Silas showed the note to Clara and Daniel. Neither could offer an explanation, though Daniel's instincts told him it wasn't merely idle caution. Whatever lay ahead, they knew one thing for certain: it wouldn't come easy. And so, armed with supplies, knowledge, and resolve, they returned to the ranch, ready once again to face whatever challenges the Wild West threw their way. For in this untamed land, survival wasn't just about strength or skill. It was about unity, courage, and the unbreakable bonds they had forged together. The journey back to the ranch was marked by a mixture of anticipation and unease. The note's cryptic warning, "Beware the storm that follows calm," lingered in Silas's mind like an unwelcome guest, refusing to be ignored. Despite the successful trade and the newfound supplies they carried, a heaviness settled over the group as they navigated the familiar paths leading home. Thomas, oblivious to the adults' concerns, chattered excitedly about the books he had been given. He clutched one tightly in his small hands, its pages already dog-eared from his eager perusal. Clara smiled at his enthusiasm, her heart swelling with pride for the boy who had brought so much light into their lives. Daniel, ever watchful, scanned the horizon for signs of trouble, his instinct honed by years of surviving in the Wild West. As they approached the ranch, the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the land. The air carried the scent of pine and earth, a comforting familiarity that eased some of the tension in Silas's chest. But when they reached the edge of their property, something felt off. The first sign was the silence. No chickens clucked in the yard, no goats bleated in the pens. Even the wind seemed to have stilled, leaving the trees motionless and the grass unnaturally still. A chill ran down Silas's spine as he dismounted his horse, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle slung across his back. "Something's not right," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara nodded, her face pale but resolute. "Stay close," she instructed Thomas, pulling him protectively to her side. Daniel moved silently, circling the area with practiced caution, his eyes darting between the cabin, the barn, and the surrounding woods. Then they saw it, a figure standing near the porch, silhouetted against the fading light. The person was cloaked in shadow, their features obscured, but there was something familiar about the stance, the way they held themselves. Silas's breath caught in his throat as recognition dawned. "It's—" he began, trailing off as the figure stepped forward into the light. Her face was lined with age and weariness, her once bright eyes now dulled by years of hardship. Yet there was no mistaking her identity. It was Sarah, Silas's sister, thought lost to him decades ago. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Silas stood rooted to the spot, disbelief warring with a flood of emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Beside him, Clara gasped softly, her grip tightening on Thomas's hand. Daniel shifted uneasily, his fingers brushing the handle of his pistol. As Silas managed finally, his voice hoarse with shock. The woman hesitated, her gaze flickering between Silas and the others before settling on him. "It's me," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "I didn't know if you'd remember me." Remember her? How could he forget? Sarah had been his only family after their parents died, the one constant in his life during the darkest days of his youth. She had disappeared without a trace when Silas was just a teenager, leaving behind only rumors of betrayal and abandonment. Now, here she was, standing on his porch as if summoned by fate itself. "What are you doing here?" Silas demanded, his tone sharper than he intended. "Where have you been all these years?" Sarah flinched at his harsh words but pressed on, her voice steady despite the tears glistening in her eyes. "I came back because I heard about you, about your life here. I wanted to see for myself if it was true. And then I found out about the danger lurking around this place." "Danger?" Clara interjected, stepping forward cautiously. "What kind of danger?" Sarah glanced nervously over her shoulder, her earlier composure cracking. "There are men coming," she admitted reluctantly. "Men who mean to harm you. They've been watching this land for weeks, waiting for the right moment to strike." Silas's blood ran cold. Another threat? After everything they had faced, could this really be happening again? Before he could ask more questions, Sarah continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "They're led by someone you knew once," she revealed, her gaze locking onto Silas. "Someone who blames you for what happened in the past." Silas froze, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. The man who had accused Clara of theft, the same man who had led the attack on their ranch, had ties to someone even more dangerous. Someone whose name Silas hadn't dared to speak aloud in years. Marcus Kane. Marcus Kane had been a powerful figure in the town where Silas and Sarah had grown up. He had taken a twisted interest in Sarah when she was young, offering her protection and wealth in exchange for her loyalty. When she refused him, choosing instead to leave with Silas, Marcus had vowed revenge. For years, Silas had believed Marcus had forgotten about them, or worse, that he had given up entirely. Now, it seemed those fears were unfounded. "He knows about you," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling, "about the life you built here, and he won't stop until it's destroyed." The revelation sent shockwaves through the group. Silas paced furiously, his mind racing as he tried to process the information. Clara stood beside him, her presence grounding him in the present. Daniel, ever vigilant, began making preparations for defense, reinforcing the fences and setting traps along the perimeter. Even Thomas, though too young to fully understand the gravity of the situation, helped where he could, fetching tools and water under the watchful eyes of the adults. That night, as the moon cast its silver glow over the land, the group gathered in the cabin, discussing their options. Sarah filled them in on what she had learned during her travels, how Marcus Kane had amassed power and influence, building an empire of fear and intimidation. His reach extended far beyond any single town, and his resources were nearly limitless. "We can't fight him head-on," Clara stated firmly, her voice cutting through the tension. "Not with what we have here. We need allies." Daniel nodded in agreement. "I'll ride out tomorrow. There are people I know, old friends, maybe even rivals, who owe me favors. If anyone can help us, they can. And I'll stay here," Sarah added, surprising everyone with her determination. "I may not be much a fighter anymore, but I know this land better than most. I can help defend it." Silas looked at her, seeing the strength beneath the years of pain and regret. For the first time since her arrival, he felt a glimmer of forgiveness, not just for her, but for himself. Together, they had survived so much. Perhaps they could survive this too. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, the group prepared for whatever lay ahead. The Wild West was a harsh, unforgiving place, but it was also a land of second chances. And for Silas, Clara, Thomas, Daniel, and even Sarah, the future held possibilities they dared to hope for, despite the storms that threatened to consume them.